Okay, thanks a lot for coming. What I'm going to speak about today is the scandal at Temple Street, the treatment of children with spina bifida. That's what I'm going to be doing Leaders' Questions on. And I want to particularly highlight for you the question, which is a very important question, which I don't think has been asked of the government yet, which is, when did they really know about what was happening? When did they know about the allegations of unlicensed implants, which we know are now true, that springs were bought off the internet, inserted into 3 children? Because what we've had in the media so far are reports. Stephen Donnelly was quoted or a spokesperson for Stephen Donnelly was quoted as saying the Department of Health only became aware of this in August. That is incredible. The first time I put a parliamentary question which questioned the use of unlicensed implants was in May to the Minister for Health. I did it again in June. So those questions were referred. I got an answer from Stephen Donnelly saying that this question is being referred, but it clearly then goes through the Department of Health before it's referred. It is on his desk. There are questions being raised about the use of unlicensed implants from May. The answers I got back from then CHI, 2 different answers in May and again in June. One saying, very strangely, to the best of our knowledge, all implants used are licensed, and the other one saying it's standard practice to use licensed implants. But again, even more explicitly, in July, on the 5th of July, in the Dáil, I asked Leo Varadkar, I asked him about the allegations of the use of unlicensed implants in Temple Street. I explicitly asked him about it. I explicitly referenced the reports, the reviews that had been undertaken by then. I asked then for those reviews to be published. Thankfully, they have been now. And in response to me, Leo Varadkar on the 5th of July said, I don't know anything about this, but I'm going to talk to Stephen Donnelly about it. So there is now a very, very serious question for Leo Varadkar as to whether he did go and talk to the Minister for Health about it. And if he did, then why did nothing happen in terms of the Department of Health? Why are they saying they don't know about it till August? There are a whole series of other issues that we're going to be raising in terms of ensuring that the external review that is now being commissioned does its job fully. One, it must absolutely include a spinal surgeon if they're going to be able to properly read the patient's charts and assess the operations that were done and so on. Secondly, it has to be widened as per the request of the families to include all orthopaedic surgery on children in Ireland. Thirdly, they need to fully meet with the families affected. I've spoken to one of the families affected. They're obviously absolutely devastated by this news. They've struggled again and again and again to get their children what they need in terms of operations, and now they hear about all this that was happening that they knew very little about. Thirdly, there has been an internal review previously about orthopaedic surgery in Crumlin. That review also now needs to be published. So we need answers to all of these things, but again, to go back, in terms of the government responsibility here, there's a very, very serious question about why they didn't take action earlier. And let's be very clear, the way a lot of media reports are written, and I presume it's the line coming from the CHI, is that the external review that was announced last week flowed on from the previous external review. That does not make any sense. You don't do a second external review after you've done a first one. The reason the external review was announced was because of the article that was published on The Ditch that exposed the use of unlicensed springs in children. That's the only reason it happened, and it's only because of a whistleblower and a journalist and parliamentary questions pushing all along the way that we ever got the internal review in the first place. Then there was the first external review that incredibly managed to miss the issue of the springs, even though they're referenced in the internal review that the external review looked at, and it's the reason that we have an external review now. So this one absolutely needs to be done properly and needs to ensure that we stop failing children with spina bifida in this state.
Okay, tomorrow People Before Profit Solidarity will be using our private members' time to put forward a motion seeking to accelerate our eviction ban bill, which was passed through second stage of the Dáil at the beginning of this year. But nothing has happened. That bill has not progressed. What the bill seeks to do is to reinstate the no-fault eviction ban while a housing emergency and homeless emergency persists. And we believe it is absolutely unconscionable that the government have continued to allow thousands and thousands of individuals and families, and worst of all children, to be evicted and in many cases made homeless when they literally have nowhere else to go. When rents in the private rented sector are completely unaffordable across huge swathes of the country, when there is not nearly enough public and affordable housing to give people alternatives, thousands of individuals, families and children are being driven into homelessness. And just as we warned when we introduced the bill to reinstate the ban at the beginning of this year, that there would be an avalanche of increased evictions, that is exactly what's happened. So in the first quarter of this year, there were 4,735 notices to quit issued. Between April and June, there were 5,753. So in just one quarter, a 21% increase in the number of people given notices to quit and facing the terrifying prospect of they and their families being made homeless, put into emergency accommodation, where for huge numbers of them they then remain trapped with absolutely no way out. And as everybody knows, we are now facing month on month new records of numbers of families, individuals and children in homelessness. More than 12,800 individuals homeless, nearly 4,000 of those children. It is absolutely disgusting that the government seem to think there is an acceptable level of eviction when you've done nothing wrong into homelessness and into all the trauma and hardship and fear and anxiety that homelessness means for those who suffer that plight. So we are appealing to the government, we're appealing to the rest of the Dáil to support our motion tomorrow to reinstate the eviction ban, at least until the housing and homelessness emergency has been resolved, and that other alternatives of public and affordable housing, of rents that are controlled and affordable for people, have actually been established. I mean, to be honest, our view is we should go further, as is the case to most of the rest of Europe, that there simply should not be no-fault evictions, but it is at the very minimum an urgent necessity that the government introduces a temporary ban on evictions so we end this avalanche of families and individuals and children into homelessness. And we will also be having a rally outside the Dáil at 6 o'clock tomorrow to support the bill before the vote takes place in the Dáil.
I'm sorry to bump you, Richard, just on that topic. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get to a point.
Yeah, sure.
What do you make of the reports this morning again that the government wants to prioritise the idea of different tax treatment for smaller landlords in the budget, with the incentive of trying to keep them in the system rather than having them leave? What would you make of the idea of having them treated separately?
No, I mean, first of all, I find it difficult to understand how landlords would be pleading financial difficulty when rents are at all-time highs. I mean, the rents that are being charged in the private rental sector are off the Richter scale. So I think the pleading poverty on the part of the landlords is just not credible. What we need to do is protect tenants, people who have done nothing wrong, who've paid their rent and are entitled surely to the basic thing of a secure, affordable roof over their head for them and their children. That people have to be protected and not driven into homelessness when they've done nothing wrong. That should be the priority, and we need a government who feels it is unacceptable for people to be made homeless when they have done nothing wrong. And unfortunately, it seems the government think there's an acceptable level of homelessness, and a lot of people are suffering as a result.
Can I ask if there's any questions on Temple Street so that I can go back to my committee if there aren't? No.
Well, as you can see, there are thousands and thousands of childcare workers and creche owners outside the gates today. They don't have a noose and they are not abusive. Instead, they are being very progressive and very engaging with the Parliament here in terms of the dilemma they face, which is basically that they can't keep going. My own community has lost about 6 creches recently, and the funding is inadequate, but the funding is also delivered in a hodgepodge way that makes administration and accountability extraordinarily cumbersome for those who run these creches. People Before Profit actually believe that we should have a publicly funded model and delivery of childcare across the whole state. And that is not to say to those creche owners and businessmen and women out there that we want to undermine them. Instead, we think they should be absorbed into a state system like any other civilised country in Europe, where at least 2% of GDP is spent on delivering childcare in a publicly funded, publicly run manner, and all of those workers should be paid properly and be absorbed into the public service. We'll be publishing this in our budget submission, our pre-budget submission, in a few days' time, but it's an important argument to make. We would not expect to send our kids to national school from the age of 4 into a hodgepodge mix-mash of community, privatised and differently funded streams of education. Why do we do it to 1, 2, 3-year-olds? And that's precisely what we're doing, and we treat the workers abysmally. So I'm absolutely 100% behind them. I'm going to go out there and speak to them now, but I think the government needs to listen. Roderick O'Gorman in particular needs to reopen the negotiations with this sector and insist that we bring up the expenditure of our GDP to European average levels from 1% to at least 2%. So that's it.
How you doing? So I'd like to make a few points about the controversy over the young black woman who was meant to get a medal, didn't get a medal, and the controversy with Gymnastics Ireland. So we had the apology at long last yesterday, but I think people are shocked and appalled at what happened, and I think that we need zero tolerance of racism within Irish sport. And I believe that there are questions that still remain. Don't have time to detail all of them here. Happy to talk to people afterwards. But some of them would include: why did it take 18 months for this apology to be delivered? What about the points that have been raised in the Guardian newspaper that the person who was given the medals wanted to make a personal apology, but that the personal apology was suppressed, that there was a declining of attempts at mediation over the last 18 months, and that the CEO of Sports Ireland denied that this was a racist incident. Is the Minister happy leaving it at the apology, or does she feel that there are questions that need to be answered in relation to this? And what measures are going to be taken now to bring in anti-racist training across all sport within Irish society? I also then want to raise a point about an event that's taken place today at the National Stadium. There's been a lot of talk about the far right since the incidents outside the gates last week. But you have a church hiring out the hall in the National Stadium today for a gathering. And at gatherings of this church, it is not unusual at all to hear not just homophobic views, but homophobic views of an extreme character. And if people want me to show them clips of that and so on, I can do so after the press conference. Are the Irish Amateur Boxing Association, who own the National Stadium, do they not have any concerns that their own diversity and inclusion policy, which includes LGBTQ people, is being breached by hiring the hall out to this particular church? And will the Minister for Sport keep an eye on this situation and speak to the IABA if action is not taken on this front. That is it.
Cash copy the breed.
See all the English language stations taking away their mics. Manora shit.
Because they're going to walk through. That mic is down there now. Sorry. Somebody's mic just got. Yeah, just. You alright? So, okay. Tá sé chun na hinflám die se na implants ceisne ardú geisnin na gannarí tróna.
Yeah, but Cora don Taoiseach inistún caitheann a fuair sé an ólas faoi na implants seo agus an tragó de bhí dul ar siúl mar dheolar na páistí le scoliosis agus diseases cosúla sin agus támuid ag corbrú mar thug Paul Murphy fóga don Taoiseach agus don minister mé agus an sin i meitheamh agus ní ra bhéin freagra ag an am sin. So tá 5 an seo agus bé míid ag cuair níos mó ceiste ag an Taoiseach